broke her jaws, and it was just amazing to see the difference that was made. And I said, well, this must have been expensive. And he said, well, that's why heart people get big bucks, in order that they can take care of the children of the world. Yeah, he's a great guy. Okay, I'll begin with a little story from Frederick Buechner. He's written a number of books, some of them fiction and some of them theology books. And in his book, The Sacred Journey, he describes his family. They came from Germany, and his great-grandfather and his grandfather were really prosperous and well-educated people in Germany, well-to-do. They came to the United States, and his grandfather and his dad went to Princeton and did really well in school. And then in the 1930s, early on, when the Great Depression hit, his father lost his job and his income and couldn't find another job. And he struggled and struggled and struggled. And then in January of 1936, early in the morning, before any in the family got up, he went to the garage and started up his Chevrolet and sat in the doorway and asphyxiated himself and died. Frederick was 10 years old then. And when people would ask him, what happened to your father? He said he died of a broken heart. He said that wasn't quite true, but it was really true, because he had lost all hope. When you lose hope, your heart breaks, and your life breaks apart from you. Now, it was 20-some years later that Frederick became a part of the faith community in the Presbyterian Church. He made reference in his book very clearly that the Buechner family didn't have much at all, if anything, to do with the gospel. They had to do with intelligence and making money and living without any sense of real hope. I visited once with a chaplain who worked in a mental health hospital. And in our conversations, I was saying, describe to me how it is with your interaction with the people in the institution. He says, the number one thing I can tell you about it is almost everyone suffers from a great deal of despair, no sense of hope. John Clay Poole, who has written a book about the heart of hope, which I have read through a number of times and reread for this class, ends up saying, hope is to us as breath is to your life. It's just as important as it for you to breathe every day and take in oxygen to stay alive. It's just as important that you have hope in your life. And God understood that. And we sometimes overlook that. I think, I used to think that we were still in despair over 9/11. But what did we lose, 3,000 some people? 750,000 now from the pandemic. We live in a time that despair can kind of ingrain in us. And then I really got pulled down again this weekend from that crazy event in Houston, Texas. I see yesterday there was an 8-year-old that they had to induce into a coma because his brain got so battered in that crazy business, And you saw on the screen where for 30 minutes they were saying, shut it down. And it's very easy in this world where evil is very alive to get depressed, to be in despair, or for moments to be torn down. But my friends, we are people of the light. And God is counting on us and calling us in this world of despair to be people of the light, to be people of hope, to be there for one another, to see what all of that may mean. So let's take a look at the picture of hope. Let's go back to 1 Corinthians 13, verse 12. I wish I had a Bible with bigger print. I do, but I don't have it with me. For now we see in a mirror, dimly, not clearly, dimly. But then we shall see face to face. Now I know only in part. Then I will know fully, even as I am fully known. We don't know everything there is to know. We haven't figured everything out yet. I don't know all about God. I think that's the great hope and anticipation, that there's always more to know about God. It's a mystery. But we will know the day that we see him and know him, that all things will be made fully for us. But our job in this life as believers and followers of Jesus is you're supposed to keep your glasses clean. Something I never do. I don't know how many times I've taught classes and somebody's come out with their shiny little bottle and said, you better clean your glasses. Oh, I said, I can see through them pretty good. And then I look up and say, oh my heavens. So, what part of life do we need to see more clearly? One is to acknowledge that there is a mystery. John Claypool has a friend that was a rabbi. He said we were kind of a neat pair. He was 70 years old and Jewish, and I was 28 years old and just getting out of seminary to begin my ministry. I lived in Tennessee in the naivety that there was such a thing as racism. All of my life and my family had slaves in their past, and I just thought it was the normal way that we were to treat people that were different from us. Then one day at my college, a preacher came to speak who Claypool says, once you hear him, you'll never forget him. So we went to hear him speak. Clarence Jordan was his name. Clarence Jordan formed the Koinonia Farms in Georgia as an integrated farm for blacks and whites and poor and rich. Way, way, way back in the 50s. He built a dormitory for people to stay in with cement blocks too thick. It wasn't enough just to have one layer of cement blocks, they had two. Because it wasn't unusual at night for the Ku Klux Klan to drive by the farm and fire at the dormitories. The Koinonia Farms was the birthplace of Habitat for Humanity. So that gives you a little understanding of who Clarence Jordan is and what he stands for. He has translated part of the New Testament into what he calls Southern Cotton Patch stories. When he tells the story of the Good Samaritan, it's not a Samaritan who comes and helps the man in the ditch. For him, it's a black man living in the South, the least expected person that would stop and help you. So I can understand how Claypool, once he meets Jordan, his life is changed and he's in a whole new, different place to see where he is. His Jewish rabbi, one time they went to Claypool's first church was in Louisville, Kentucky. It's after he had his experience and his awakening with Clarence Jordan. So he got involved in the desegregation or movement in the 60s. And he had this meeting in Louisville between all the black pastors in Louisville and the white pastors. The meeting did not go too well. And the black pastors finally left and said to the white pastors, "You don't have any courage to live out the gospel of Jesus Christ." Claypool says it was an awareness that in our culture we needed to live together as black and whites, but more importantly, it was a denial of the gospel to live as segregated people. So he said to his friend as they were leaving, it was at the synagogue where he was, and he said to leaving, I see no way there's going to be any hope. This is going to be a problem that we're always going to have. And the 70-year-old rabbi said, "Would you come into my office with me?" So slowly he took his pipe out of his drawer and filled it with tobacco and lit it. And as the smoke drew up, he said, "We need to have a conversation." You know, in the Jewish faith, the only unforgivable sin is despair. In the Jewish faith, the only unforgivable sin is despair and hopelessness. If this God, who made everything and gave it to us, will he not also give us things to help us deal with despair? You know, in the Latin, in creation story, it says that everything was created ex nihilo. Can you say that? Ex nihilo? Ex nihilo means created out of nothingness. So God didn't take 2 parts of hydrogen and 1 part of oxygen and make water. He made it out of nothingness. And if this God, who can make all of creation out of nothingness and give us this gift, Claypool says, can you imagine for a moment that God, somewhere in his wisdom and his divine understanding, decided that I have joy in my life, and to be alive could be a great, great thing, so I'll make human beings. So he gave us our life. You didn't buy it. It wasn't a Walmart special or Blue Light special. It was a gift from God. And your every breath of your life and your every word of forgiveness spoken to you and every word of love that comes from God or another human being is a gift from God to you. And this God who created you doesn't love somebody better than somebody else. He loves everybody the same. And he loves everybody with the same strength and opportunity. And he forgives everybody the same. And he offers grace to everybody the same. So we have this marvelous gift to see that he is with us at all these times, not to cause us despair, and to be with us. So let us take a little look and see how it comes to us, first of all, through the words of Scripture. Well, let me see if I can find it in here. It's in the book of Genesis. 6th chapter it begins. It's the day God gave up on us. The day God wanted to do away with us all. It's right here. The Lord, 6th chapter, 5th verse. The Lord saw the wickedness of humankind, and it was great on the earth, and that every inclination of thoughts and of their hearts was only evil continuously. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on earth, and he grieved it into his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created, people together with animals, creeping things, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I made them. But Noah found favor in the Lord. Noah was a righteous man, blameless to his generation, and Noah walked with God. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. But God decided not to do away with them all. He decided he'd start over with Noah. I think we forget that God got so upset with where things were going on that he started over with Noah. So this great creator God now becomes the compassionate, forgiving God of a second chance. Right there in the beginning of the first book of the Bible, you're given a second chance. Just like you are every morning you get up. Isn't that neat? That's why I think God gives us permission to look in the mirror. I think that's why we begin every worship service with the forgiveness of sins. I think we get to live our life a lot better when we are able to be a dump truck and get rid of all that stuff that we've done wrong and all the stuff that is opposed to God. And not only did he say that to Noah, but then he gave us a promise, didn't he? He says, when you see that bow in the sky, that colorful rainbow, you need to remember that that's a promise that I'm not going to do this again. I'm not going to destroy all humankind and living creatures again. I've given you a second chance. Is that not a sign of hope? Is that not a sign of hope that's before you every day of your life? That every time something goes wrong, there is always the possibility and the invitation for a new beginning and a second chance. Is that not what the forgiveness of sin means to us? Is that not part of God's great heart? That He wants to give us the forgiveness of sins and a new beginning to see where we are and what all that may mean for us. I have in my living room, I think people come to, in Wyoming, I think people come into my living room and they think it's the Noah room. Behind the couch we got a great big tapestry made of an ark with animals and Noah and everybody in it. And then above it we got a sign that God always keeps His promises, and next to it we've got Noah. And then on our coffee table I have an ark that's about this big, full of all kinds of animals and Noah. And what else do we have? Something else I can't remember. Remember, Dee? Well, it's there. There's a couple other signs. Oh, God always keeps His promises. Yeah. So I don't know how big the Noah story is to you. You know, you kind of like to think, well, he had an ark, and, you know, you remember Bill Cosby, who ended up saying his story about Noah and the ark, this foolish man, he must have gone nuts on dry land, and it's not even raining, he's building an ark. Well, strange things happen in your life when you listen to God. Strange and wonderful things in life happen when you listen to God. Not just know about Him, but really listen to Him deep into your heart, into your soul, and that's what Noah did. So that's part of the great big story. And then we have many other great big stories, but we'll hit some of the highlights. You know this guy Abraham? Before they had their names changed, they were Abram and Sarai. And then they had their conversion to Abraham and Sarah. Anybody here 75 years of old or older? Well, what if you find out, ladies, at 75, that a voice from God comes and says, you're pregnant? That's what happened, isn't it? They didn't have any children, and He's going to bless Abraham, and He's going to tell him, you're going to have more descendants than there's particles of sand on the seashore and stars in the sky. And then He told him to get up and move to a different place. And he didn't even have GPS. The only thing he had was God's power system. Well, then one day he's out there and some 3 men come by. Remember the story? And Abraham says, oh, go tell Sarah that we need to prepare some food. We got some people coming. We want to welcome them. Abraham was a great man of faith. He knew about hospitality. He knew about welcoming strangers. He knew about welcoming people that were different from him. Do you think we could use that in this world today? That we could have that kind of hospitality? So the strangers come and they ask, where is Sarah? Well, she's out in the kitchen. Well, in 9 months, she's going to give birth to a child. Sarah's in the kitchen, and she laughed. When she came out to meet the man, she said she didn't laugh, and they said that she did. I think you'd laugh because you didn't want to cry. So the story goes, and Abraham becomes a great nation. And his life is based on this covenant with God, this new covenant relationship that we have with God, that he's going to be there and be a part of our life. So, hope comes from the Abraham and Sarah story that the impossible possibility happens with God. I don't know how else you call that, the possibility. But Abraham gets blessed and is a blessing to us. When's the last time you counted your blessings? Do you ever do that as a part of your spiritual life? I think it helps us keep centered on God, and I think it keeps hope alive for us. I got out of bed this morning. I checked it out. My heart was still beating. In the middle of the night, I had indigestion because I ate too much pizza before I went to bed. And I thought I might not wake up in the morning. You know, that kind of heartburn you have, you wish you never had? Yeah. Those little white pills I take didn't kind of do it. Or I shut off my mind and started to eat too much too late at night. But we get up to this new, fresh start every day. And we look around at the people that God has placed in our life who love us and have conversation with us and care for us. And then we come to places like this and sit around and share the good news and the story about God and our lives and what that means for us. We have much, much, much to be grateful for. In Mark, the first chapter, the 40th verse. Come on, New Testament. Matthew 25, I'm getting close, 26, 7, 28, Mark 1:40. A leper came, begging him. Kneeling, he said to him, "If you choose, can you make me clean?" Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, "I do choose to make you clean." Immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. Two things happen. You aren't to touch lepers. You know that from the scriptures. But Jesus does. And immediately as he touches him, he's made clean. It's where hope comes from. The miraculous miracles of God. A miracle is an instant changing. Water to wine at the wedding. Remember the story? It's the first miracle in John's Gospel. He did it instantly. And I guess it wasn't just ordinary wine. It was top shelf stuff. Well, God still does that miracle. It just takes a little longer. You plant the grape seed in the ground, the vine grows, it bears fruit. You pick the fruit, you ferment it, and you make wine. That too is a miracle, isn't it? But God has the capacity to do miracles instantly. 5,000 people, plus women and children. The little boy has some fish and a few loaves of bread. The disciples say, that's not enough. Won't feed hardly anybody. 12 basketfuls are left over afterwards. He instantly multiplies the bread. He still multiplies the bread, doesn't he? Any of you been grain farmers? You put the seed in the ground, even when it's hopeless. I marvel at farmers. 3 years of drought and you don't have anything, and the fourth year comes out and you still put it in the ground. And then you harvest it and it goes to the mill and you get your flour and you make your bread and you feed people. It's the miracle too. It's just that Jesus has the power to do those things instantly. Well, secondly, we need to remind ourselves of other kinds of miracles that God does. God does that as he brings us together. Remember when the Hebrews were in Egypt and the Egyptian Pharaoh got really nervous because the Hebrews were multiplying faster than the Egyptians, and he didn't like having these foreigners around. So remember what he did? He had an immigration policy. It was kill the firstborn males in the family, 2 years and younger. Moses' mom is pregnant. Moses is born and she wants to save him. She makes a basket out of the reeds and hides him in the reeds and says to his sister, you stay here while I'm working and watch over him. You remember the story. One day the Pharaoh's daughter comes down to bathe and she hears the baby cry. She goes and she wants to save the baby. She takes it in and his sister says, I know a lady who could take care of this baby for you. It was really Moses' mom. So Moses grows up in an Egyptian family, goes to the Egyptian school, is well educated. And then one day, see, there are two kinds of people in the world. There are those who think everything should happen for them alone. And then there are those that think everything good should happen for the whole world. Moses was the latter kind. Pharaoh was the first kind. The scripture kind of asks us, which kind are we? Do we want the good news for everyone? Moses did. A Hebrew, an Egyptian insulted him, and he got in a fight, and with his hands he killed him. Then Moses, in order to save his life, had to run off to the wilderness for 40 years. And he's out there in the wilderness. And I suppose you people that are here when it's 127 degrees might believe this, that some days it gets hot enough that a bush could burn by itself. Well, that's what happened. That's not the miracle. The miracle is that the bush was burning, but it was never consumed. The original bush just stayed there. And it got Moses' attention. And then God said to him, you've got to go back to Egypt and free your people from the Egyptians. Well, Claypool says this interesting thing that I don't know if it's true, but it's kind of like your faith imagination. He imagined that Moses thought, I was in school with this Pharaoh guy. He wasn't a very nice guy. He was kind of, you're not going to convince this guy that you should be nice to foreigners. So Moses kind of hesitates, like most people of faith do when a task becomes hard for us. Have you ever hesitated? When you're in church, you're at least supposed to think honestly. Have you ever hesitated to do something for God? Well, Moses goes in, confronts them, and you know the story. He leads them through the Red Sea, and the waters are parted, and the sea comes back as the Israelites get through, and the Egyptian soldiers are in the Red Sea. And then this amazing thing happens that somewhere is big in my faith experience. I don't know how many times I quote this when I get in despair. The Israelites are wondering how they're going to know where to go. You remember what God said? A pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day will be out in front of you to show you the way. Jesus rises from the dead, and where are you to go? He says, the angel says to them, go to Galilee ahead. He's ahead of you there. You're wondering where God is. He's always out in front of you, ahead of you. A pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day. It isn't that God is just present with you. He's out in front of you, pulling you ahead, saying there's more love for you, there's more forgiveness, there's more grace, there's more peace of mind, there's more meaning in your life if you just will get on with it and follow me, because I'm out in front of you. That's a great statement of faith for me. I have a tendency, like most of us do, I think, that we can get down in the pits and in despair when stuff doesn't quite go right. But if we are reminded we're pulled out of there, and the other way I get pulled out of there is that Jesus says when he dies on the cross, he draws all people to himself. Just doesn't invite them. He draws them like a magnet to receive the love and grace and forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Today you shall be with me in paradise. All of those great statements of faith that come from Jesus to us to pull us forward, to be before us. Okay, moving on. God not only speaks through the scriptures, not only speaks through the miraculous stories of the faith, but he speaks to us with a strength that endures. Have you ever received the strength of God in the midst of turmoil or in the shadows of despair? John Claypool, when his daughter was 8.5, she got cancer. And for about 9 months she suffered. Claypool says, the last 3 months I had to carry her every day to the bathroom. We had to bathe her, clothe her, and feed her. After she passed away, he struggled, as most of us do in times like that, deeply. About 8 months later, he ran into his rabbi friend. who was the one who told him that Jews' unforgivable sin is not letting despair. So he asked him this question: where in the valley of all your pain and grief did you see God? Where in your pain of all your grief when you lose somebody, where in your pain of disappointments and despair in your life did God appear to you? Claypool thought, and he said, I'll have to take some time to think about this. Well, he said, you come here next Wednesday. I'll have the coffee on and my pipe going, and we'll have a conversation. Claypool remembered the worst day of his daughter's suffering. It was near the end of her life when they were trying to put an IV into her. And they kept poking and poking and poking, and it didn't get in. And she kept crying and saying, Dad, make them stop. And Dad said it was such a horrible moment, I wanted to run away and say it wasn't real. And then it happened. Something came over me. I grabbed my daughter's hand, and we both sensed the presence of God. And she died with a smile on her face. That made me think, where has God spoken to me in the valleys of darkness and grief? Must have been almost 50 years ago now. I was on the golf course in Williston, North Dakota. 5 o'clock in the evening. On the 6th fairway, the pro comes out in these golf carts and runs and says, Al, you got a phone call. You have to call this number. It was in Wisconsin. I knew my mom went in to have surgery on her colon again. That's the first thought that came to my mind, was the fact that my brother, who was born the same day I was, 7 years apart, my older brother, was on his way in to see my mom, and a cement truck crossed over the center lane and killed him instantly. I got in the car in North Dakota to drive back to Wisconsin. Got in the middle of Minnesota, pulled off to a rest area. I said, I better calm down or I'll be in a wreck. And then I said to God, help me to be an instrument to help my brother's family and his wife in any way you see. When I get there, I say to Dorothy, is there anything I can do for you? And she says, yeah, stand next beside me tomorrow evening at the wake. I stood beside my sister-in-law for 4 hours and heard hundreds of people who knew my brother pass out and say words of life about what my brother meant to them. And in the shadow of darkness in that grief, God gave me some light. When my stepson and Dee's son got killed in a car accident, the doorbell rang at 5 o'clock in the morning. Our friend Pastor Pino from the church, Lutheran church in town, was there with the deputy and said Stephen had got killed in a car accident. Larry came in and we cried and prayed and told stories. And then in the living room, sitting on the couch, when he prayed the Lord's Prayer, there was a peace that went over us that didn't say, pretend it didn't happen, but it said to us, I'm going to be with you, and somehow you'll make it. When my father died, I knew he didn't want to die. He died at 60. He says it's too young to die. I stood by my two brothers and I said, let us greet all the people that come. The town bum came. I probably told you that story. My dad gave him money for food every day of the week. Teachers came in. My dad was on the school board. They wouldn't be teaching now if he didn't fight for a second chance for them. It happens. My daughter-in-law said to me, because my brother died the other day, well, you remember how Bob used to watch the Packer game and thought he was the coach of the Packers and always hollered out what should go on? Do you suppose when we watch the game today, we will hear him? It's the remembering of the moments you had with those that helps us it's the moments God chooses to be present with us and to be a part of our life. I know you've had them. You just have to pay attention. It's the blessings that you've had. It doesn't make any easier that grief is easy for you. It isn't. It's the hardest work you do on earth. But you don't do it alone. That's where hope comes from. And hope comes from this marvelous story of a God who makes things dead come back to life and give us a place to be with one another. Two little short stories. Years ago, the most fun thing I've ever did as a pastor is teach confirmation to kids and parents. It's at the top of my list. And somehow God once in a while would press the crazy button in me to figure out there might be a better way to get the gospel across. So we were having a retreat with parents and kids on a Saturday morning from 9 till noon. So they all met at the church. And I said, get in your cars, follow me, we're going to the junkyard. We're going to spend better than 2 hours out there today. Well, some of them wanted to turn around and go home. So we get out there, and I said, your task, because it's Easter, is to go in this junkyard with your kids and parents together and find symbols and signs of new life. Or how out of this mess new life can come. Well, you wouldn't have wanted to hear the moans and the groans. And some people didn't even want to move. I wish I remembered all that came back, but there were 2 or 3 things I remember came back that stick in my mind. And one of them was from a boy whose grandmother came with him. His parents weren't interested in coming with him. He kind of wanted to know what it was about. After about an hour and 10 minutes, he comes in and he says, we got it, Pastor Al. He pulls out of his sack a robin's nest with some eggs that had been cracked open. I got this out of the back seat of a Studebaker car. It's in the mess of this junkyard that God makes all things new. Wow. It's out of the mess of your life that God comes to make things new for you. One of the other kids found an old broken flashlight that still worked. It was dim. But he says, I think this works, doesn't it, Pastor? That we're supposed to make our light shine in the darkness? I wonder how long this has been here. It's still shining. He says, you and I are supposed to shine too. And then a girl came in with an old radio that still worked. She turned it on. She says, I got to find the music station. In the midst of all this junk, you got to learn to sing that God is still alive and He is with us. Do you think it was a good day? Do you think it was a day they'll never forget, those who got with it? Do you think it's a day that made this pastor's faith a little bigger and deeper? You bet. Well, then, that crazy thing worked pretty good. So 2 years later, it was December, and we had another Saturday retreat. I said to the guys and gals, take your pens and pencils and grow in groups of 3 and go down on Main Street and go in every store and visit with every person who's shopping and see if they'll talk to you about Christmas or observe some of the things that they're doing about Christmas. So we read the Christmas story in Matthew, and then we read the Christmas story in John 1:14, that the Word became flesh and lived among us full of grace and truth. We had been studying those for a few weeks. So they went down there. First 3 boys ran into a grandma. And they said to her, we got to do this crazy thing for confirmation to figure out what shopping has to do with Christmas. And Grandma said to them, you got it wrong. You should go back and tell your pastor he should have asked you the question, what does Christmas have to do with a gift? So she's told them the story of when she lived on the farm in the 30s and they had nothing. And Grandma made for her 2 Christmas cookies. And that's all she got. But her grandma put her on her lap and read her the story of Jesus being born in a way that she said, I'll never forget. Some other gals ran into a mom who had 2 kids. And she was trying to Christmas shop, and they were just driving her nuts. So they said, well, we're on this kind of venture from our church. And she says, well, what kind of church is it that you go that you'd be out here doing that? So she told them. So the one girl says, why don't you let me take your little daughter in the stroller while you shop? And the other lady says, I'll take a hold of the hand of your boy and we'll go around and look at things. And we'll be gone for an hour. Do you think that's enough? Those kids came back and said, I think we ought to go home and tell our folks it's time to have babies. They had so much fun. And the lady found out their names and came to church on the Sunday of Christmas and brought them Christmas cards with $2 in the card to give to them on Christmas and say thank you. Was it a crazy idea? I don't know how it affected them all, but I know there are other stories I wish I could remember. Where do you see him? Here and now and then. Do you think those kids followed Jesus to the junkyard? And to the stores? And do you think maybe even Jesus followed them in real ways the rest of their lives? I sure pray and hope so. And I'm sure thankful that God sends me sometimes on these ventures to see where that is. Questions, comments, thoughts? So think of the craziest thing you can do when your grandchildren come, and then maybe they'll find the real meaning of Christmas. Or write to them and tell them, or call them. And if you're good at Facebook, you can even go and see them. If you can do that, you're way ahead of me. Any thoughts? What's the most hopeful thing that you've ever seen in your life? What's the most hopeful thing that you have ever seen in your life? I don't have anything to do until I have to have my wife home by 1:30. What's the most hopeful thing that you've ever seen or has ever happened to you in your life? We can't leave until I have 3 answers. Okay. Oh. Did you hear what she said the first time she walked into church here? She felt she was home. Anyone else?
Yeah. When my first son was born, because I was never a babysitter, so that was new.
Say it just a little louder, please.
My first son was born.
Your first son?
Yeah, I never babysat, so it was just like, wow.
Oh. Her first son was born. It was wow. Anyone else?
I have one, but I'll cry. It happened to me last spring. My son-in-law, who we all loved very much, he had heart surgery, and after he came out of surgery, they thought he was fine, but then he actually died, and they were working on bringing him back. And Becky called, and it just broke my heart. She said it was so horrible to watch him in pain and not be able to do anything. And she described what was going on, and I tried to encourage her. And that night, I don't know if it was a dream, my sister swears it's vision, but I saw George, and he was with his son who had died as a teenager in a car wreck. And he was at peace, and he says, I don't want to go back. I want to stay. When I woke up in the There is something that's waiting for all of us. And that's when I really knew I needed an anchor. I needed something. And it was in the middle of COVID, and that was bad enough. And then Shirley, God bless her, I asked her if she would kind of introduce me to the church, because I've been here before, and it was always felt at peace here. And she did, and I've been coming since then. But I really feel that God touched me there.
Well, I'll just affirm that dreams are spiritual gifts from God.
Well, I guess if my sister swears it's a vision. She said it was a vision sent from above. I don't know. All I know is
Well, if he can turn ashes back to being a human being and make something out of nothing, why can't he give us a dream or a vision?
well, it certainly helped me. It, like I said, brought back my faith.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Any-
I like to tell because I cried.
Anyone else? Well, I'm going to send you away today with a benediction that I like, okay? As you go on your way, may Christ go with you. May he go before you to show you the way. May he be behind you to encourage you, beside you to be your friend, within you to give you peace, and above you to watch over. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Have a great week. We are meeting next week. Same channel.